Welcome to the Hellmouth. Teenage vampire slayer Buffy Summers comes to Sunnydale and must avert a vampire plot to open up a portal to hell.
We start with two teenagers, I'm making air quotes there, who are sneaking into a high school to get up to the roof.
If I was a teenager trying to break into a place, a high school is probably the last place I would be wanting to break into. During the whole scene, the girl seems to be afraid, but the whole thing is a fake out because it turns out she's a vampire. And then we go into our intro. I do like the idea of starting with kind of the horror music and the wolf howling, and then going into something more upbeat to let you know it's going to be something different. Buffy Summers,
who is a 16-year-old, that's also in quotes.
She's going to her first day at Sunnydale High School, and we find out that she was kicked out of her previous school. This show does follow up after the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie.
Have been chosen, Buffy.
To do what?
To stop the vampires.
Does Elvis talk to you?
But you don't have to see the movie to understand what's going on, and it's not strictly canonical, it's just kind of the general events are assumed to have taken place, so we're not going to get into that. We meet a couple of our side characters. We see Xander on a skateboard. Again, this is the 90s.
For me, he played a little too hard into his role, and he's not the only character I'm going to say that about.
He's played by Nicholas Brendon, who's best known for the TV show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and also for getting arrested a whole bunch of times. I thought it was a pretty good stunt when he ran into that railing. We also meet Willow. We know she's a nerd because she knows math and dresses weird, even though, again, since it's a 90s TV show, she's played by an attractive actress who does not look like a nerd. Allison Hannigan, who's best known for the American Pie movies and the show How I Met Your Mother. I don't watch any of that stuff, so I don't know.
We also meet a character named Jesse, and I'm not very familiar with the show, but I didn't recognize him, so I assumed something was going to happen to him in this episode, where he would die.
He's played by Eric Balfour, who was in every shitty sci-fi or horror movie you ever skipped past when you were looking for something better to watch.
The dialogue throughout this whole episode, really, trying way too hard to be witty. The banter going back and forth between all characters would make me want to leave the room if I were actually there.
Because you couldn't keep up? No, I agree.
I'm out of here.
We then cut to Buffy talking to Principal Flutie.
He was pretty funny.
I'm more familiar with the show than you are. He's definitely my favorite character from the early episodes.
Mr. Flutie.
All the kids here are free to call me Bob.
Bob.
But they don't.
Buffy drops some of her stuff, and Xander arrives to help her pick it up, and she accidentally leaves behind a wooden stake.
This is the start of some odd things happening, and something that kind of bothered me was the way that all these characters, no matter how weird the stuff gets, just take it in stride.
His reaction was very implausible for the sake of what is a very obvious joke.
And again, it's trying to be too clever,
while almost pointing out to you that it's being clever. When Buffy goes to class, we meet Cordelia, who is clearly the, quote, popular girl. She's played by Charisma Carpenter, who was in the movie Bound, which is the 50 Shades of Grey Asylum knockoff. So clearly her career went up after Buffy. She's a very stereotypical character.
Valley girl.
Very shallow, preppy, dumb bitch girl.
And while I was watching all these characters interact with each other, I couldn't help but think it's been so many years since these people were actually in high school.
It was a very common thing in that time period to hire actors that were way too old for their characters. But in this show, I feel like it's particularly distracting. The bell rings for the next class, but instead of going to her next class, Buffy goes into the library.
What a kick-ass library for a high school.
That's true. And of course, we almost never see any other kids in there. Yeah, now that I think about it, it's weird that the one kid we do see in there is Xander. What was he doing in there?
Do you really want to know what he was doing behind that shelf? Where he knows no one else is going to be?
Okay, I guess not. We meet Giles, the librarian, who immediately pulls out a giant book with the word vampire on the cover, and Buffy runs away, accompanied by the most stock sound effect there is.
What is it you said?
We then cut to a locker room scene, and there's a subtle joke in there about a girl's name.
What kind of name is Buffy? Hey, Aphrodisia. Oh, hey!
And I thought that was a moment where the humor really worked and wasn't so much in your face.
Agreed. I actually didn't even notice that joke until I read the novelization. Part of why I missed it is because it's hard to tell what the hell they're saying. They're all trying way too hard to sound hip and cool, and fresh and young. And I didn't like it.
Well, the chatter in the cast is that she got kicked out, and that's where her mom had to get a new job. Neg. Pause.
Oh, man.
Was that actual slang from the 90s? I might have missed all of that actually going through the 90s.
And then a body falls out of a locker.
Buffy decides to talk to Willow to help her with her studies, and she also runs into Xander and the other guy that's going to die later. I already forgot his name. It was hard for me to like these characters, and I'm hoping it's going to improve.
Then Cordelia comes over and mentions the dead guy. We get some suspenseful music as Buffy sneaks around to the locker room, and she busts a door open, which is the first sign we get of her abnormal abilities. And when she looks at the body, I like her reaction.
Oh, great.
So she goes to talk to Giles about it.
Buffy gives us some helpful exposition about how people are turned into vampires.
To make you a vampire, they have to suck your blood. And then you have to suck their blood. It's like a whole big sucking thing. Mostly, they're just gonna kill you.
And then Giles gives us some helpful exposition about what it means to be a Slayer.
Into each generation, a Slayer is born. One girl in all the world, a chosen one born with the
Strength and skill to hunt the
vampire.
vampires.
So Buffy's a Slayer, and Giles is a Watcher.
A watcher.
Watches?
Yes. No. He trains her. He prepares her.
Prepares me for what?
Then Buffy turns into Peter Parker, just starts complaining about how much she hates being a Slayer.
And kind of storms out, and it's revealed the entire exchange was overheard by Xander, who was doing something back there.
Giles is convinced that something big is going to happen soon, and he harasses Buffy out in the hall.
From the show's perspective, I get it, but if anybody in high school was walking by and saw a new teacher cornering a 16-year-old girl and getting really close and being all creepy, it would send up some red flags.
We finally get some more vampire stuff.
The show finally gets good when Brian Thompson shows up.
And he spouts out a lot of generic bad guy dialogue.
The sleeper will wake, and the world will bleed.
We've seen him a couple times already on this channel, so check out those videos if you want some more Brian Thompson. We cut back to Buffy preparing to go to the club that they call the Bronze, and we see that in addition to Slayer problems, she also has stereotypical 90s teen girl problems.
On her way to the club, she's walking down an alley and is being followed by a mysterious figure.
They briefly fight, and she takes him down, and it turns out that he seems to know who she is. He warns her about something called the Harvest, but he doesn't actually say anything useful. He gives her a cross, but if she's the Slayer and she knows about vampires, wouldn't she probably already be carrying one?
I mean, she carries around wooden stakes in her backpack already.
So he basically didn't help her at all, so what was the point?
He also seemed to be trying way too hard to be cool.
We get to the Bronze, which could easily have had the alternate name of the 90s Incarnate. There's this generic band on stage trying desperately to look cool, and we get some camera work that's trying desperately to look energetic.
And there's a music video thrown in the middle of the whole thing.
When she goes in, she spots Giles, trying desperately to look cool by hanging around all these 20-somethings, trying desperately to look like high schoolers. And when he responded to her bringing that up, I realized that he was easily the most relatable character so far.
Oh, right. This is me having fun. Watching clown hair prance about is hardly my idea of a party.
And again, it doesn't help an outsider's perspective to see this new teacher show up at a club with all these high schoolers leering down at them.
She tells him about the weird stalker guy, and she says,
I really didn't like him.
but since it's a TV show, we can already tell where things are going to go. Cordelia is there too, because of course she is, and Jesse hits on her and is rebuffed.
Oh, yeah, I'm on the prowl. Witness me prowling.
And I again realized that Giles is the most relatable character in this show so far.
Giles says that because Buffy's a Slayer, she should be able to identify vampires just by feeling it, basically. And she picks out one guy.
Based on his dated sense of style.
And he leaves with Willow, so Buffy goes after them.
To me, that scene made Buffy seem cold, because she doesn't seem to care about the fact that there's a vampire there until she sees that he's talking to somebody that she knows. If he didn't talk to Willow, was she just going to let him go? What if she saw him walking out with someone else? And when she's following after them, she breaks a leg off a chair to use as a stake, so we find out that she's also a vandal. She mistakenly attacks Cordelia, and I liked Cordelia's response.
God! What is your childhood trauma?
And then we see Darla, the vampire from the beginning, talking to Jesse. Things might finally move in a positive direction. He might die.
We cut back to Brian Thompson, who watches the Master come out of a badly composited shot.
Which Del Toro later stole for Blade 2.
I was expecting a very generic, I'm the evil bad guy, but he was very goofy to me. I was impressed, though, with his makeup and the way he looked.
I agree. I thought he looked pretty cool.
Especially for a 90s TV show, it could have been just really bad.
What about the other vampire makeups?
They weren't bad. It was funny to me how none of them could talk once they changed into a vampire and their teeth kept getting in the way, but it was distinctive.
We see Willow being led to a graveyard by the vampire.
Which probably could have turned into a PSA of things to avoid so you don't get sexually assaulted.
He tosses her into a mausoleum, and then Darla shows up with Jesse, and it turns out that she already bit him. Then Buffy shows up, we get some more banter.
Now, we can do this the hard way, or, well, actually, there's just the hard way.
And she sticks one of the vampires, who turns into dust. The effect is not the best I've ever seen, believe it or not, and the weird video game sound effects that accompany it don't help.
Yeah. Brian Thompson also shows up, and he and Buffy fight, and Buffy's losing.
And Brian Thompson spouts out some Jedi prophecy or whatever.
And the blood of men will flow as wine, when the Master will walk among them once more.
And to be continued. And this is where I said, oh man, are they going to kill the title character in the first episode? So if you were watching this back in the day, and you got this far, would you have wanted to see what was going to happen next? The first time I tried to watch this show, this is where I gave up.
I would have given it the benefit of the doubt and gone through the entirety of the first episode, even though it's a two-parter, before I made that decision. But I could see some people choosing not to continue. We also have to think about what other kinds of TV shows were on in this time period.
That is true. I was watching it well after it had originally aired. So now on to part 2, The Harvest.
Buffy escapes with the help of her cross from earlier.
And then Buffy just runs away. She rescues Willow and Xander, and she stabs one vampire with a branch, but we don't hear the sound of it turning to dust, which is a little weird.
Xander, are you okay?
We get some more Giles exposition. He says that vampires came from the last demon to leave Earth, mixing its blood with a human.
The pacing of this episode was going so fast, it almost felt like a movie, because you have all these characters who are now on the same team, and they're all committed to going towards the same goal.
Which I thought was a huge improvement over the first episode.
What I did not think was a huge improvement was Xander's f***ing shirt.
It was the 90s. There were definitely some questionable fashion styles back then.
We even see that chain on his pants that people used to do back in the day. I'm telling you, I used to be cool. This episode just brought it all back. At one point, Willow says,
This may be the dumb question, but shouldn't we call the police?
And they'd believe us, of course.
Well, we don't have to say vampires. We could just say that there's a bad man.
And I really liked that line because that's something I always think about in movies and TV shows like this. They don't have to tell them it's alien slugs or it's vampires or something supernatural.
Right. And at least Buffy does also have a reason for not calling them.
Right.
They couldn't handle it even if they did show up. They'd only come with guns.
And we also find out that Willow is a hacker because, again, this show is from the 90s.
Yeah, when she got on the net, very impressive.
I also like that they addressed the fact that Luke, Brian Thompson's character, popped up out of nowhere. And that's also how they find out that there's an underground tunnel entrance there.
I thought it was funny that Giles was a librarian and had no idea how to use a computer.
I mean, I feel like that's plausible for the time period.
But his career path, I'm sure librarians would have been all over that.
Yeah, what that makes me question is how he got a job as a librarian in a high school when he's really a watcher.
And didn't he say he was a curator at a British museum or something?
Yeah.
That doesn't qualify you.
Buffy goes to check out the tunnel, and she's stopped by Principal Flutie, who doesn't buy her Mission for Giles story. And I like when he says,
maybe that's how they do things in Britain. They've got that royal family and all kinds of problems.
And then there's a super convincing shot of Buffy jumping over the fence.
Yeah, was that CGI? How'd they do that? Buffy gets to the mausoleum and meets the guy from before, who says his name is Angel.
Angel. It's a pretty name.
He gives her some vague directions, but again doesn't offer to help. He seems more concerned with maintaining his sense of mystery than actually being helpful.
Agreed.
And it turns out that Xander has followed Buffy into the tunnels, and then we get a Highlander transition to the library. And we see Giles figuring out that the harvest is tonight, and I didn't get the point of that scene because we already know that.
Cordelia's talking to her friend in their programming class about Buffy. Her friend is played by Mercedes McNabb, who I knew from the Addams Family movies from the 90s.
Is this made from real lemons? Yes. I only like all natural foods and beverages, organically grown, with no preservatives. Are you sure they're real lemons?
And she also played young Sue Storm in the 1994 Fantastic Four. So we've also seen her on this channel before.
I found it impressive that Cordelia is able to do anything on a computer.
And her friend is even dumber than she is.
Why do we have to devise these programs? Isn't that what nerds are for? What'd she do?
She's doing something else.
And then Keanu Reeves with long hair pops out of nowhere for no reason, doesn't add anything, and then we never see him again.
His appearance was awesome.
And she comes running at me, screaming with the sticks. I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill you. I swear.
Who?
Who? Oh, man. Too bad that guy wasn't the main character.
Down in the tunnels, Buffy and Xander find Jesse and make the most noise possible.
Jesse!
Oh, no.
Jesse!
And then they even say,
Think anyone heard that?
but it's not as loud as them talking. And then a bunch of vampires block the tunnels, and they just stand there like monsters in a movie. I do like the shot where you just see their eyes glowing in the dark. I thought that was cool.
I like the effect of the door being bent out of shape.
So it turns out Jesse is a vampire. He talks about how much better everything is now, but no one mentions that it's clearly harder for him to talk now. And even though this whole scheme is a plan to trap Buffy, she and Xander still manage to get away.
And the master down below does not react favorably to the news.
You've got something in your eye.
We see Willow walk into the library and we get that sound effect again. And it made me decide that if I ever run a store, instead of having a bell ring when someone walks in, I'm going to have that sound play. We don't know a whole lot about what being a watcher really means, but I find it really funny that Giles is trying to stop this huge apocalyptic event, and he has to rely on a high schooler to look things up for him. He determines that Buffy has to kill a vampire with this three-pointed symbol on his head to prevent him from funneling strength to the Master and enabling him to open the Hellmouth to bring demons back and free himself. Xander intuits that the vampires are going to go to the Bronze, because that's where people congregate, but Buffy's mom forbids her from going out. She pulls a big trunk out of her closet. I thought she was going to set up a dummy of herself in her bed to make it look like she was still there.
What is this, the 90s?
But it turns out she's just getting her slaying supplies. We see that Cordelia is at the Bronze, and we find out that she has terrible taste in music.
Oh, I love this song. Come on.
All the vampires show up, and the bouncer at the door says no one gets inside without ID. But they already said earlier that anybody can get in.
Right.
And it's filled with high schoolers.
Right.
Unless maybe they were all let in because they clearly look older than 21. Brian Thompson gets up on stage.
There is no cause for alarm.
And demonstrates why he never became a stand-up comedian.
Actually, there is cause for alarm. It just won't do any good.
And I love all the fake screams in the background in this scene.
Yes.
They were really funny.
All the main characters arrive, and then Buffy fights Brian Thompson.
It's a very 90s, underwhelming TV fight with lots of pointless spins and flips, and lion roars on Brian Thompson's part. At one point, Darla has a great stock scream moment.
I always call that the Time Splitters scream, because that's what I always remember it from.
Xander kills Jesse, thankfully, so the show does improve a little as it goes on.
I did enjoy the humor of him dying.
You don't have the gun?
And then Buffy tricks Brian Thompson.
I did really like that joke.
I did too.
There's something you forgot about, too. Sunrise. It's in about 9 hours, moron.
And then Angel pops out and doesn't do anything again. He reminded me of Katana from the Mortal Kombat movie.
Yeah.
She just kind of stands off on the side and says things.
Things that already happened.
Then we cut to school the next day, Everything's back to normal. We see a kid playing with a hacky sack, which reminded me that this was the 90s, in case I somehow forgot. And there's this annoying, upbeat, overbearing music in the background.
I mean, the dead rose. We should at least have an assembly.
People have a tendency to rationalize what they can and forget what they can't.
They really want you to know that things have turned out well, even though Jesse's dead. I mean, I guess that is a good thing.
It did really seem like a movie where they had to wrap everything up.
And they talk about more bad stuff coming, but the tone is so happy that it just felt weird.
It's something that bothered me for this whole thing, how chill everyone is about everything.
Welcome to the Hellmouth and the Harvest. Overall,
as an introductory episode for an entire series, I thought it did a good job. It established who the characters were, even if some of them played too hard into their roles, but I didn't hate any of them. The show really establishes itself as being from the 90s, the clothes everyone was wearing, the music, just the overall style of everything, which I think I'll get used to, but it's going to stand out. The main plot is there, we know the kinds of things that are going to happen, and I wonder if they're going to be as clean cut as this one, where everything is wrapped up by the end, and we'll just wait until next week. But overall, I thought it was decently strong. I gave it a B.
I really struggled with my rating on this, especially given that I didn't make it past that first episode the first time I tried. I thought the second half was definitely a lot better because it was more plot focused and had a lot less of the faux clever dialogue that made it feel like it was being performed in a high school play. I gave it a C-. I did think it established all the characters well, except for Angel, who again didn't do anything and was just kind of there in the background. But it didn't make any of them feel like real people at all, which to me made it impossible to care about any of them, or about anything that happens. Buffy herself didn't have much in the way of unique qualities among hero characters to set her apart in any way, other than being somewhat ditzy, which is not what you would normally expect, but that can only go so far. And it didn't do anything interesting with the vampires, and made them more of a joke than a threat a lot of the time. And that was my biggest problem, is there was a huge tonal disconnect between the show trying to be amusing and then trying to be dramatic at the same time. And to me, it didn't quite succeed at either one. But it wasn't terrible, it just wasn't very good.
Those are really good points. I actually am going to change my rating from a B to a C+.
So peer pressure is real. This really is like freaking high school in the 90s.
Yeah.